Well, as mentioned earlier, the government has announced that from the 1st of March, foreign investment in farmland will be scrutinised by the Foreign Investment Review Board if it's worth more than $15 million. That's down from a threshold of around $240 or $250 million. Anything up to that at the moment isn't scrutinised automatically. Well, now it will be if it's more than $15 million. To discuss the reasons behind this and the impact it may have, the Agriculture Minister Barnaby Joyce joins us now from Canberra. Minister, thanks for your time this afternoon. Now, the government has said that, in fact, Tony Abbott said on election night that Australia is open for business. We've heard the government talk about opening up the north of Australia, in particular to agricultural development as a food bowl for Asia. Is what you're doing here going to make it harder to attract foreign investment?
No. For investment that is to our national purpose and in our national interest and authentic, we're only too happy to attract it. But what we had before, David, was an absurdity. We had a system where it's 252 million. So I could buy, if I was from overseas, and someone from overseas could buy a place to the north of your town for $250 million. The same person could come back the next day and buy $250 million of land to the west of your town, and then likewise to the south and the east, $250 million on a further 2 days, and never have to go before the Foreign Investment Review Board. And people, whether they're in the suburbs or out in the bush, said that is outrageous. That is absolute nonsense. We want a better oversight over our most precious asset, which is the land we stand on. It is our most precious asset because if you want more gold, you just dig deeper, refine better, and you get more gold. If you needed another Sydney Opera House, I'm sure with the right motivation can build it. But the only agricultural land that we know of in the world is in existence at this moment, and is actually getting less of it as some of it goes under urbanisation. Now, the difference we have now, of course, David, is we actually have a policy difference because we want to take it from 252 down to 15. The Labor Party, in all their wisdom, want to take it from 252 to 1,000 million, a billion. So, as I said, at $500 an acre, that means you could buy a place more than three times the size of the Australian Capital Territory and not have to go to the Foreign Investment Review Board. It's an absurdity. Get them on your show and ask them about it.
As you point out, currently you could buy all these parcels of land for $250 million without any scrutiny. But is that happening? I guess what I'm asking is there any foreign investment right now that you are actually concerned about?
Oh, absolutely. All the time, David, when I'm out, and I'm sure when you're out, people say to you, look, do you know that all this property around this district is being sold off? Now, in many instances, we can't confirm it or otherwise because there's no register and there's no reason for them to have to actually apply to FIRB.
But what's the problem with that is what I'm getting at. What's actually happening once it's in foreign hands?
Well, there's a whole range of things. If it's not in our national interest, if you get closed loops, for instance, where a person grows something on a place, takes it to the next stage of production on that place, then exports it overseas, then it's out of the Australian market. And people have to ask the question in the long term, what's the benefit to Australia?
So what's a practical example of that that's happening now?
Well, I can think of quite a few. But I'm not going to start putting them on your show, otherwise I'm sure
without naming the company, fair enough. But are you talking about people growing wheat or fibres and then producing it on the same?
Yeah, and then taking to the next step of production and of course then you straight away exporting it. You can also get it in a whole range of areas where it's not just how much land they own, it's what land they own.
But Australian owners can do that too, though, can't they? They can grow something, manufacture it, and sell it overseas.
No, you can't. I tell you what you can't do, David. I tell you what definitely is not allowed. You can't go to China and just buy up farmland.
No, I'm talking about here in Australia. That's a good point.
You can't go to Korea.
You can't. But here,
you can't. In fact, we remain the most liberal nation on earth. You can't go to many states of the United States and do it. You can't go to many parts of Europe and do it. And in New Zealand, you can't do it nearly to the same extent you can do it here. And then everybody says that even with these changes, we remain the most liberal on earth. Remember, David, this is a review. Not a ban. It triggers a review of the acquisition.
But the Labor Party doesn't even want a reason, though, is what I'm getting at. You're actually changing this because you are concerned about what's happening right now. Will it apply retrospectively to purchases that have already been made?
Well, once they've been made, and I don't believe that retrospectivity is a good policy, but it's got to start somewhere. We've got to start somewhere. I mean, if you want to do the analogy, if people say, well, there's no problem with it, well, how would you feel if we just sold off all the land in Australia? Would that, if it's not a problem, maybe that's not a problem, but of course it is a problem. It's an absurdity. And when people say, oh, they can't take the land with them, well, no, England did not take Hong Kong back to England, but by gosh, it made a lot of money out of it. They didn't take India back to England, but by gosh, they made a lot of money out of it. You don't have to take the land anywhere. You can just make the return off it, and the actual ownership of it becomes something that, if it gets out of control, seminally changes the nature of your nation. First and foremost, the Australian people asked this of us. They asked it of us, and we have delivered. The Labor Party, completely contrarian to the Australian people's view, have said, stick it up your jumper, rather than reduce the scrutiny. We're going to take it to $1 billion just to tell you to go jump in the lake.
Not all farm owners are happy with this. You would have seen some of them. One of Australia's biggest grain growers, John Nicoletti, says it's going to hurt farm values because you've got fewer potential buyers, I suppose. So it could depress some farm values, couldn't it?
Australian farm values comparatively across the globe, David, still remain one of the cheapest around. Commerce, authentic buyers with a commercial interest are still going to have a strong interest in the purchase of an asset which is the absolute underwriter of what wealth is. Land is wealth, water is wealth. They're not making any more of it. That's why you've got to be exceptionally careful with it.
Now, away from your portfolio, can I ask what do you think about the approach now on the budget? You've been a long-time critic of the debt levels that have been mounting up in Australia. Joe Hockey's been warning we need to proceed with these budget measures from last year, otherwise we may never get back to surplus. Do you agree with that? You should press on with things like GP co-payment, pension changes to the dole and higher education reform. Do you believe you've got to pursue those?
Well, David, if we basically gutto out of this, all we do is we basically, I always use this analogy, David, it's like going to the restaurant and saying, look, okay, kids, we're here today, we're going to have lobster, we're going to have Moet, because it's a German name, we're going to have Moet, we're going to finish with some Frangelico, let's go crazy with the strawberries and cream. And then at the end of the meal you say, and by the way, you pay the bill and here's the tea towel because you can't pay it off, so off to the kitchen you go. We can't do that to our children. We've got to be responsible. We've got to make sure that we get control of the financial position of this nation. Otherwise, whether it's 5, 10 or 15 years down the track, we won't be arguing about a Medicare co-payment because we won't be able to afford Medicare full stop. We won't be able to afford the pharmaceutical benefit scheme. You won't be able to properly defend yourself as a nation. You won't be able to afford pensions. And at that point in time, in 5, 10 or 15 years' time, people will say, how did you let this happen to us? How did you let this happen to our nation? And I don't want it to be, for my part, or for Joe Hockey's part, or for Tony Abbott's part, to say, because we were scared. We were scared, so we did nothing. The Labor Party created this mess. Unfortunately, we have to fix it up, and we will collect the opprobrium of trying to fix up their mess. But we're still waiting for the Labor Party, seeing it is their mess, seeing it is their pigsty, to come up with some plan of how they would clean up their pigsty of a financial mess. But none has been forthcoming as yet.
We are yet to see exactly what they do. You've got other crossbenchers, though, that you've been struggling to get these measures passed by. So do you accept that will have to be some pretty drastic changes to some of these elements if you're going to get them through the Senate?
Well, we obviously got to negotiate to get through the Senate. That's the nature of Australian politics. And but we have to clearly spell the case that it's a simple equation. If you want all the services and you don't want to give up on any of them, and you want them all at free or at a discounted price, then we're going to have to increase our revenues. You're going to have to increase your taxes. If you say, I don't want to increase my taxes, then you have to go back and say, well, we're going to have to talk about what services we let go. If you say, well, I don't want to do either of those, you say, well, there's a short-term solution. You borrow the money, but your debt will keep growing. And now the debt is well in excess of, I believe, $352,000 million. You tell your client, if it goes on this trajectory, and I started talking about this back in 2009, then you will get to a point where it's not that you'll run out of money because it's all borrowed money. You'll get to a point where people won't lend you any more money.
Barnaby Joyce, Agriculture Minister, good to talk to you this afternoon. Thanks for that.
Good on you.
We'll take a break. Back with more on PM Agenda. Stay with us.